Great. I would like to say, first of all, thank you very much to Christian and Sean for organizing this and providing this platform for us to meet each other and have discussions about this exciting topic, dance. With that and without further ado, I would like to set the stage a little bit for my talk, because I guess one of the motivations of this conference is, why should others maybe also care about what we are doing? Why should cognitive science care about dance? And why should we maybe approach them and tell them all about dance and why it's important to research it? So a bit about me. So I work at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics. It's an institute that has as a mission to use scientific methods to explain the psychological, neurological, social-cultural basis of aesthetic perceptions and judgments of observers to different art forms. So that's a bit the direction I'm coming from. Dance is also being studied here at the Institute. However, very little. I'm one of the few people that is studying dance. And I guess that is a mirror of the general picture in society, in science, in the media. Dance is sort of always the little brother, the little cousin, maybe even just of the other big art forms. And I think that we have ourselves, us, that we work on dance in different disciplines, academic disciplines, I should say, to blame. We should take people with us on the dance floor. And why I'm saying that, just a little bit about me. Christian was completely right that I work now as a scientist, but I was before a dancer. I trained as a ballet dancer, but I was injured and I retrained, let's say, as a psychologist and neuroscientist. And my first, let's say, research trajectory actually was moral psychology and neuroethics. But one day in a neuroimaging lab, invited speaker, again, the invited people are important, he started talking about a design that he had heard about in a paper. And they had studied the action observation network. And they had studied the effect of expertise on the brain. And they had used dancers to study this scientific question with a neuroimaging method. Maybe you all know who I'm talking about, or whose research was being talked about. It was the seminal study by Beatrice Calvo-Merino, who with Patrick Haggard and their wonderful team from UCL discovered that action expertise, such as that of dancers, modulates the sensory motor responses of the brain when we watch dance. Later, I then discovered Emily Cross' seminal papers as well on these effects of action expertise, movement expertise on the brain, and using dancers and dance training as a way to research something about the human mind. So that's my motivation. These are my stars, my models that I go after. And so I asked, could I maybe do my PhD on the topic of empirical research into dance. It was not very specified yet. And I was lucky to be in a research group with Camilo José Cela Conde. Maybe you know him. He researches, or his group researched very much on painting, so aesthetic experiences of paintings, empirical assessments of what happens when we look at visual art. And they said yes, and I was the luckiest, happiest person on earth. And then I started talking to people, and the question that came up all the time was, why dance? Why do you want to study dance? Dance is just something we do for fun, it's sort of hanging, right? It's something we do for fun, or something to attract mates on a party, maybe. What else is there to dance? So that was weird for me, because as I said, I come from a background in dance, as probably many of you do. So we know that's not all that there is to dance. But very early on in my PhD, I had this impression, I need to convince people that dance is important, and what can it do for us, and why should we care? So together with my PhD supervisor and another colleague, Tony Gomila, we set out to research a bit in the literature. What is there? Like, what are the functions, potentially the behavioral functions of dance? And we put it a bit tentatively provocative, not all about sex, because that's what you find mostly. It's a mating ritual. And that's what we're up against, I guess. So some preconceptions about dance that are not quite right for us, that we come from the side of, you know, a background in dance. I mean, one of the parts of the research that we did also found, we're just replicating, obviously, what so many people have said in the past, that dance is present in all cultures. It has been present before our time and everywhere in the world. And this is something to always, I guess, illustrate in one way or another to people. All right, so this is the stage setting. Now I'm giving you just an outline of what I would like to talk about, though Christian actually already said it, just a little bit about dance and cognitive science, trying to define it, trying to operationalize it. And you hear here, I speak with the words of an experimental psychologist. So bear with me, those of you who are not experimental psychologists. I love interdisciplinary work, but my language is experimental psychology, but please don't judge me for it. But maybe we can talk to each other and find ways to find the right translations, and in that way also convince others to believe more in dance research. Then I would like to speak a little bit about two specific studies that we've done together with Beatrice Calvo-Merino, actually, on emotional sensitivity and emotional expertise in professional dancers. That's my main topic of research also at the moment, although I am venturing into some intervention research, hopefully Corona permitting, which is what I would like to talk to you about. Just a couple of photos basically of the current work at the end. Right, so when we define dance, at least as empirical scientists, we need to describe as best as ever possible the phenomenon. So let's define dance. I know a lot of people have tried this in the past, and I'm not going to do very well at it, but just to make a point here. So dance, I guess we can agree on, is something that we can watch. It's something we can do on our own. It's something we can do as a couple. It's something we can do as a group. It can be a high art where we need to learn a lot of technique and repertoire and background information. It can be something that we do as an improvisation, without music, with music, something to find ourselves or express something. It can be a fight. It can be a therapy. It can be a mating ritual. It can be something that connects me through the movements that I did as a child with the culture that I feel I belong to, like here to Persian dance, or make me feel belong to a subculture like street dance. It can be something that is a sport, like mere sport almost, Zumba and all these related dance styles that are for fitness, or it can be a spiritual experience. Dance can be so many things. In empirical sciences, it's a little bit difficult sometimes, because what we do there normally is that we fragment or we operationalize our phenomenon into variables and want to test the influence of some dependent variables on our independent variable, or the other way around, our independent variable on the dependent variables. So what can we actually do? Because I know how reluctant we usually are as dancers to fragment dance. Is it still dance if we do that? I must say I haven't found a satisfactory response to this, but I just want to put these thoughts to you, that from empirical sciences, that's what people are going to expect that we do. And maybe some of the people in cognitive science that we want to convince, they want to hear us speak in these terms, even if we then convince them of doing something slightly different. So what kind of dependent variables, so things that we measure, have been assessed? For example, health variables, loads of it. Cognitive measures have been taken. We have studied brain structure and function, and we might also take well-being and mood measures as outcome measures after dancing, from watching dance. And we all say that this is dance that produces this. However, illustrated by the left side graphs, we find quite diverse research findings sometimes, and that doesn't help when we want to convince someone of, we need to study dance more. Well, one group finds this, the other finds that, and they all say it's about dance. Let me illustrate this point a little bit. So just a quick overview of some research we've recently reviewed. I would also very much suggest that you check Sabine Koch's recent papers on review papers on these topics. I love reading them and I recommend them warmly. So, for example, what has been found about dance? Whoops. Keep on receiving these admit people. So dancing maintains cognitive flexibility in old age. It improves mood and well-being. It improves balance and coordination, reduces risk for heart disease, burns calories, increases bone density and decreases it. Okay. Expertise modulates brain structure, the action observation network, aesthetic responsiveness, emotion recognition abilities, interoceptive accuracy. It reduces cortisol and it increases it. Excuse me. So it does both. So for people like you probably all are with a background in dance, this is not surprising. It's just the difference between hobby and professional dance probably here. But again, when we have such diverse research findings and all of them say that they are talking about dance, then we know that this diverse phenomenon has all these different facets and we know why this makes sense. But to the general public, to the broader scientific community, and maybe also sometimes the media, this is a bit difficult to understand. So it's up to us to operationalize dance, and sometimes the definitions that are out there are really not helping us. So according to the Oxford Dictionary, dance is a series of movements and steps that are usually performed through music. It can also be referred to the art of dancing. Yeah, right. So that doesn't help. So these conceptions are out there, and we know that this is much more diverse, and the definition is much more something like this. So can the scientific method maybe help us a little bit? I'm being provocative. I know that we don't like to do this to dance. But what the scientific method does, it sort of tries to put a little bit of a structure and see if there's something that we can isolate and then measure, right? Can we do that with dance? Well, almost very bad what I'm going to say now, but why not? Dances differ in terms of their music and their rhythmic complexity. We know that cognitive scientists know that it makes a difference if something has a high complexity or low complexity to our cognitive systems. It makes a difference if there's physical proximity in the dance or there isn't. Our mammal brain has a special architecture for proximity. We need the other. So if someone comes closer, it's different than someone is further away. Dance is different in terms of their emotional expressivity and how much it's taught or how little it is taught. The domains vary. Is dancing done as a therapy? Is it a club setting? Is it a hobby dance or a professional dance setting? Is it a spiritual setting? All these matter for our cognitive framing. The technique complexity of the dance, likewise, as the rhythm complexity matters, and the level of physical exertion is different in different dance styles. So maybe we could help the conversation with other disciplines in that we try to operationalize dance, at least describe it a little bit, the dance style that we're interested in studying with our project in terms of a series of variables. I'm just proposing these here, but there might be many others that we want to show how this dance style that we are studying today is sort of measured along. So for example, I study mostly ballet dance and more recently Persian dance, so I could maybe operationalize that more clearly with regards to these variables. Right, so these were a couple of points just for inspiration that basically mean to say we should find ways to take people with us, because I think we can all agree that dancing is an amazing behavior and behaviors of humans are interesting, but sometimes they're not very well known and we need to sort of tell other people about it, especially if they don't dance themselves. Right, so for the second part, I would like to speak a little bit about two studies that I was very fortunate to be allowed to do with Beatriz Calvo Merino. I got a Newton International Fellowship from the British Academy, who was the funder of this research. So again, I'll give you the story of the background, right? So in empirical research, so what I would say, we can have two rough ways of studying the phenomenon of dance. We might go to a lab and present people a lot of stimuli of a dance style. So here is an overview of some stimuli that have been used in the empirical research until 2015 from a review. What we do is we sit people in a lab or in a theater setting, have them watch these dances, and then we measure different things, heart rate, like physiology more generally, the brain, or as illustrated with the little hand is rating tasks like aesthetic rating or emotion recognition. Various cognitive measures can be taken in response to what people have just seen. Another and then obviously we can vary the groups that we give these tasks to in terms of maybe expertise, so dancers and not dancers, or the culture that people come from, to study about how enculturation processes affect the way we watch dance. The other way I would say that we can study dance is intervention studies, obviously very common in therapy. We take some measures before, then we have people dance, and then we do some after. So my own research was inspired by studying psychology, basically. So I heard that in psychological research, a lot of effort was put into studying emotion recognition. And I'm sure you must know that there's a huge tradition of emotion recognition, starting with Paul Ekman, well, actually with Darwin. So this is nothing new to you. But you know, these different types of stimuli that have been used in experimental psychology work, to me always, they were a little bit, I always ask myself, why don't they just use dance as a way to assess emotion here? Because dancing, I remembered from my own dance education, here's just a little girl learning the swan arms, that we are taught the movements. So yes, we might be movement experts, but we're not only taught that, we are actually also taught to endow our movements, so each movement, with emotional expressivity. So instead of maybe studying different types of emotional actions, with dance, we could actually study the way that the body portrays different emotions in one same movement. So what you see here, for example, is just the practice of one dance movement, the tendu bec, in a class, and on stage, the portrayal of this same movement, of this word, as I would say, this language to express, which has a completely different expressivity than the just technical rehearsal that we have in class. These little details, people don't know that about dance. So telling about it, I think, makes sense, and then to motivate a research question. So particularly with Beatrice, we were interested in understanding what does it do if people have been trained in dancing and endowing their movements with emotional expressivity. Is there a different experience when the person sees emotional expressions in others? So if this was true, obviously, or if there was evidence to support this, of course, this would be interested from an embodiment perspective. So the setup that we used was, as you can, just see here, probably anticipate, is a lab-based study that we did. We have different group of people watch a series of dance movements, and we measure some things that I will go into in a moment. The inspiration and the background of this was obviously the work on action perception and dance expertise. I think it's always a good idea to motivate empirical research with where it came from. So that's why I'm saying this so many times. And what we did, so where it came from, sorry, I should say, let's say in the non-dance realm. So I'm using experimental psychology research of emotion, and now I'm applying it to dance. So that's what I meant with that. So we needed a series of stimuli. And during my PhD, I was happy that I was allowed to create a little stimuli library. You can see them here. They were taken from actual dance performances, very short sequences of emotional body movement that we wanted to show to dancers, and controls. And these dance movements that we showed the participants, they varied in their emotional expressivity. They were either from happy parts of the dance or from sad parts of the dance. And they were taken from the stimuli library. We've created a couple of libraries since then, and I'm very happy to share the stimuli materials if anyone is interested. Just for you to see, I know that the videos are going to be hackly, but just for you to have a slight idea of what they might have looked like. The faces were blurred in order to only have the emotional expressivity of the body in the picture during the experiment. They were 6 seconds long, and there was no music. And as I said, they were of 2 emotional valences, so happy and sad. So we asked whether dance expertise gives a higher sensitivity to the emotional expressivity of others' bodies. So, as I said already, so what we measured in this case, people watching these dance movements, was emotion recognition. So they were asked to judge, how happy is this movement, how sad is this movement? And we took also psychophysiological measures, so GSR, galvanic skin response. We took this because we wanted to see whether the bodies, not only their ratings that they do consciously, whether their bodies would make a difference between watching a happy or a sad movement. And importantly, what we did with these stimuli, which we didn't tell the participants, was that we showed them 48 videos, and then we showed them the same 48 videos again, but backwards. And this was our control condition. So we interleaved or randomized all these 96 videos, and people weren't aware that we were doing it. Very few people actually picked it up. Even the dancers weren't clear about it. And then we looked at the results. So what you see here is several graphs. Let's just go one by one. I think you can see my cursor. So the behavioral results were maybe not very unexpected, that the dancers were better at recognizing the emotions than the controls. But if we look at the right side of this graph here, the differences in the 2 bars is happy and sad movies or dance movements. And there was a backward presentation and there was a forward presentation. And there was a main effect of emotion. So dancers and controls bodies, let's say, differed in the sense that for dancers, the 2 different emotional categories differed for their bodies. So their bodies reacted to the different emotional categories that were around. While this was not the case for the backwards presentations. So clearly their bodies were sensitive, one, to the way they had learned the movements, so the canonical order, let's say, plus to the emotional expressivity. And we also linked the physiology to the behavior. So you see here some scattered dots. Up here you have the dancer, down here you have the controls, and forward and backwards presentations. And only for the forward presentation was there a correlation between participants' own ratings of emotion and their physiology. So this point 1 hints at some sort of embodiment of the experience of the other's emotional expression. And second, it actually raises another question. Why are dancers so good at emotion recognition? And the fact that their bodies were reacting also hints to like some sort of physiological mechanism for that. Could that be interoception? So interoception is the sense of our body from within. And it has a quite some decades of research tradition now. And interestingly, interoceptive accuracy correlates positively with emotional sensitivity, empathy, interpersonal sensitivity, emotional resilience, quite a few interesting points in relation to emotion seem to be related to people's interoceptive accuracy. Now, we're lucky because interoceptive accuracy can actually be measured fairly easy with a task where you measure people's sensitivity or accuracy to detect their own bodily signals. Beautiful research by Sarah Garfinkel, Hugo Creechley, maybe you can read if this was interesting for you. What is interesting in the relation to dance was that we were now on the quest to see if we can find any sort of physiological mechanism that might be in some way linked to this emotional expertise effects that we found. And that was inspired by a previous work that had actually shown that musicians and singers have a higher interoceptive accuracy than control participants. So other researchers had tried to find other groups of participants that are particularly good or that have a very high interoceptive accuracy, but it seems very difficult to find that. The motivation for searching for this is obviously, if it's so good to have a high interoceptive accuracy, let's all train in whatever makes us better in it, right? So as you see here, quick overview, not very good results so far, but we tried to see if maybe just like the musicians, also the dancers would be higher in interoceptive accuracy. And our proposal was that it might be that it is not just paying attention to your emotions that makes you better at interoceptive accuracy, but the actual process of paying attention to your emotion, generating them and expressing them with your body that makes all the difference, because that would be different from meditators or yogis who, yes, pay very much attention to their emotions maybe and learn to let them go. All these other bodily traditions have their own processes that are important, but in dance particularly, you're working on expressing it, and in music and singing as well. So that was why we felt motivated to try this. Right, so here we go. That was the background that I actually already just told you. Sorry. And we had, again, two groups. We had dancers and controls, and we had a classical heart rate detection task as interoceptive accuracy task. You ask people, as you can see in the little illustration below, to count their own heartbeats for set intervals of time that you don't reveal the length of, and you monitor their actual heart rate alongside, and you compare the counts with the actual heart rates, and there you obtain a little metric that tells you between 0 and 1 how interoceptive accurate this person is. And indeed, we did find a very strong effect of dance experience on interoceptive accuracy, and this was modulated even by years of experience. So some very slight indication that it's not just people who are interoceptively more accurate from the outset also become dancers, but there seems to be something about the training at least that does it. So just summing up these two graphs, that we also had a little bit of a exploratory finding that people who scored high on just arts experience, so visual arts experience, also had higher interoceptive accuracy, maybe for the future. All right, real quick, I think I'm still allowed to talk a little bit. So just the, the current work I would like to talk about. I'll just go back one step because I was looking at the clock. I got a little bit worried, but I remember we had 5 minutes of introduction, so maybe I'm allowed to continue. The conclusion of the previous work obviously is that this needs to be followed up. It needs to be replicated. We need to see if it's egg or hen, if it's really the dance training that makes the difference. But there were some hints towards embodiment being a process by which that is modulated by training, and that perceiving others' emotions somehow has an effect on our body when we're trained in dance in this case. Right, so moving on now to the more present work at the moment. I got interested in cross-cultural aesthetics about 4 years ago when we got a grant with Vincent Walsh from UCL to study cross-cultural experience of dance. And it was a cross-cultural project with researchers from Iran. And since then, we've worked on a project with Persian dance, slightly or very unknown style. Even many Iranians don't know about it. And we are setting up a training study where we hope to basically be able to take some measures before and after a group of people learns Persian dance. And we have outcome measures related to emotional sensitivity and interoception, but specifically to getting to know a new culture through the movements. Now, a lot of the movements of Persian dance actually are very reminiscent of other parts of Persian cultures, of gestures or of cultural habits and so on. So yeah, this is coming up, hopefully. This is our team, international team, not very easy during Corona. We were able to do a little pilot study at the British Science Festival in 2019, just before the pandemic. And I just want to show you a couple of photos because I find it, yeah, quite interesting how just by 1 hour of dancing, we found a small effect already on actually a social proximity measure. Just, whoops. So now it's unhappy with me here. Okay, just say thank you to Emily because she made it possible. So we taught people about Persian culture and how it mirrors, you know, the general cultural aesthetics of Persian arts through the dance movements. With a sort of intervention type protocol. We've conducted interviews and so on. And I just want to show you this picture. So at the beginning of the class, that was how people put themselves into the room. And by the end of the class, they were clustered really close together. So their peripersonal space had shrunk considerably. And that just after 1 hour of training. Yeah, it was just a very beautiful experience. And I'm sure you know all about this. I'm hoping to help to bring more evidence about this with this research project. It's the plan. We hope to bring it forward. You know that replication is very important in these kind of studies. So that's what we're trying to. And now I'm going to ask Christian if I'm still allowed to give you the cultural experience of embodying Persian dance movements for 2 minutes. We could.
You have about a minute, so yeah, we can go over by a minute. That's fine.
All right. Then let's do it, everyone. I would find it really nice if you would join me for a little dance. I'll just stop share for real briefly. And
let's do some Persian arm movements. Begin with the arms in front of the body, hands right in front of the hips. This is first position, front. Now open the arms a bit so that the hands are on the side of the.
Oh, we can't see your video. Sorry.
I know, because I clicked on it in the wrong way. That's when I'm not very savvy. Now it's coming. So if we just do some dance movements together, it's.
Let's do some Persian arm movements. Begin with the arms in front of the body, hands right in front of the hips. This is first position, front. Now open the arms a bit so that the hands are on the side of the body. This is first position, side. Lift the arms up to shoulder level. This is second position. Notice that there's a little curve in the arms. The elbows are a bit dropped. Lift the arms a little higher, keeping the curve. This is fourth position to the side. And now lift up so that the arms are overhead. This is fifth position. Cross one hand over the other and bring the hands down so that you're framing your face. And now a little lower so that you're framing your heart. These are both third position. And come back down to first position. And now we're going to take both arms to one side with one hand lower than the other. This is fourth position, front, because your torso is facing your arms and the arms are in front of the body. And then we go to the other side. and then back down to first position. We're going to curl the hands now, making circles with the hands, circling the hands inward. And we're going to go through all the positions we just did in one motion. And let's do that with music.
I hope you all joined us.
That was great.
Shahzad says hi. So yeah, I hope you feel better. That's one of our stimuli materials. We have a lot of stimuli materials. So if ever you want stimuli and you want to get in touch, thank you for doing that. And just ask. We always have. All right,
So
sorry.
I'll give Julia a big hand here. Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and I really needed that at the end there. Get my wrist warmed up. So thank you guys for already chatting me the letter Q. That will let me know that you have questions. So the first question is from Sabine. So go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have a question and a comment. The question is being a little bit of advocatus diaboli. I'm really interested whether the heart rate estimation is a good operationalization for interoception, because I know it's widely used, and Olga Poyatos and Beate Herbert use it a lot in Germany, but I'm not so sure that it's well studied how it correlates actually with other, what you would say are measures of interoceptive accuracy, such as, I don't know, feeling hunger, feeling when you need to go to the bathroom, feeling anger, feeling, emotions as well as sensations. I don't know, do you know whether this is well established in correlation to other interoceptive measures, Julia? So that's my question.
So should I answer first?
Sure.
Yeah, so my expertise in this field is not only interoceptive accuracy. So I've read the literature, so I can't tell you if there's something newest out there that I'm not aware of, but there are some of these other tasks where you have people swallow balloons and they should tell how full you feel or whatever. these very, very, or drink a lot of water, I can't remember. So there are different tasks. And what I've understood from them, they are they're not as easy to do. And the benefit of doing that is not necessarily bigger than using the interoceptive accuracy task that is such a classical one. And the fact that it gets replicated over and again, the effect might hint that we can use it. But Sarah Garfinkel also has this nice paper in biological psychology where she dissociates different aspects of interoception. Yeah, I mean, you are the one that would actually be able to answer this question more.
We should do look at some correlations with other interoceptive.
Yeah. I think one important thing that I already hinted at is that there's not enough replication of the effects that have been shown, and the sample sizes are always ridiculous. Sorry. So that's what I also meant before, that the results are all over the place. So yeah. Replication.
And my comment to come to that is that I think such a beautiful way to get to know a culture by immersion into the music and the dance of the culture. And so I guess that happened for you with the Persian dance. And for me, it happened with the capoeira, which I'm practicing. So it really gives me a connection to, South America. It gives me a connection to Africa, where it actually stems from a lot of things that came into it. Which is such a nice way to connect to a culture, I think maybe we should do that more.
Yeah, maybe like the Iranians have the tarov, this like, no, 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 no. Do you want tea? No, 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 no. And they have a dance movement that is sort of going with that, It's wonderful. Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for that comment.
Wonderful. Great question. I think next up is Sean. You had a question?
Yes, it's a question about the idea that you can teach emotional expressivity, which I assume, I suppose you can. And then you would be able to say, yes, that's the correct way to do it, or that's not the correct way to do it. So I'm just wondering if this might carry over into kind of ordinary life, and we would be able to recognize correctness criteria for emotions. Would you be able to actually, I'm not quite sure if I have a well-formed question here, but I'm just wondering if there are anything like correctness criteria for emotions, or is that implied in the idea that you can teach it?
So I actually really like this question because it just made it clear to me that I have to rephrase how I write about this, because it makes a big difference. So there's no correct way, I wouldn't say that's absolutely true. But there's something like this. So dancers are taught to embody and to express a movement, an emotion through the same movement sequence. They can make it angry, happy, sad. And then the question is, does the one that's watching it recognize these emotions? And we've done a ballet movement library and a Persian dance movement library where we asked the expressor, so the dancer, to express different emotions. So for example, she had to dance a sequence of 8 counts. One's happy, one's sad, one's angry, one's neutral, and so on. And then we would, so she says, okay, this is happy, this is for me. And then we would have, so we're depriving the stimulus, no face, only a silhouette, and so on. And we would have observers who are naive to dance judge whether they can see happy or sad or what they see in these movements. And the recognition rate is really quite high, also across cultures. The data is not ready yet, otherwise I would have talked to you about that as well. And there seems to be like fairly high cross-cultural recognition rates for people from different cultures for emotions expressed in these abstract movements that are dance movements. So that's, I guess, quite interesting. But it's not correct or incorrect. It's just that we seem to label them similarly. There was one study by Haimadi, maybe I'm not pronouncing it right, in 2001 in Psychological Science, where she looked at expressions of emotions in Indian dance and asked Americans and Indian participants to judge the emotions that they saw there. And in Indian dance, there are quite clear rules for how emotion is expressed. That's not like that in ballet or in Persian dance, for example. It's not as clear set. Indian dance is very clear. But still, without knowing all these rules, the Americans and the Indians had the same recognition rate. So it's a question from experimental psychology that's interesting, and maybe interesting more generally for cognitive science and people researching dance.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, next we have a question from Cynthia.
Hi, thank you so much for that interesting presentation. Yeah, I was just thinking of analogies between dance and music. And with the emotional valence of happy and sad and music, you think major and minor. And it just raised a question because you play a major backwards, you still hear it as part of the major key, as happy. And if you play a minor backwards, you still hear it as sad. And for sure, if you're trained more in music, you can make the distinctions better. But the background, the backward condition, it doesn't seem to work. And I was wondering, do you think there's like an implicit narrative element in the dance, a directional element that would explain why it would be harder to recognize, the happy versus sad when going backwards? I mean, why would it differ in dance from music?
why would it differ from dance, from music? Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
Yes. Yeah. Why is it that the dancers would have difficulty recognizing that emotional valence of happy, sad, when the dance is backwards, when that's not the case for, like, if you do a major or minor, come back down, descending.
Yeah. No, sorry. I should have said that maybe a bit different. So they did recognize the emotions with their ratings. So behaviorally, they recognized, also if you spun backwards or forwards. Now we use ballet, so sometimes the movements can be done forwards and backwards. It's the same. But in this case, what was the main effect was the physiology differed for forward and backwards presentations. And the difference, so the physiology only made a difference, let's say the body of the dancer only made a difference when they were presented forwards for happy and sad movements. But they did recognize them well. I think the controls recognized them slightly worse in backwards condition, but no, you're right. I mean, it's similar to music, I guess.
It is similar in that sense, and in the physiology response too would work the same way with the music, or
I don't know. I don't know if it has been done with music. I'm completely out of music research. I really only do that about music. Yes, I don't know. Maybe it has been done. Maybe it hasn't.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next, we have a question from Eiley.
Hi, Julia. Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I hope this isn't too simplistic of a question, but I'm a philosopher rather than a psychologist, so these studies are a little hard for me to get my arms around. But my question is connected to Cynthia's. I'm a former ballet dancer, and I've done Swan Lake, and I can't conceive of doing Swan Lake without the music. And so I understand that you're isolating the music out when you're showing their emotional response. But the way that I see my question connected to Cynthia's is this way. I see dance, or a dance, as a hybrid thing that isn't just ballet movement. So it might include narrative, might include sets, it might include auditory, musical connections, it might include all these things. And so for me to isolate the movement out is perplexing, because if I'm watching the meaning of a dance and the meaning of Swan Lake, including the sadness, the story is part of it, the narrative, the music, the other things that help me to interpret what the bodily movement means. And I'm not sure that if I was presented, even with 10 years of professional level ballet training, I'm not sure that I could interpret the emotional expressivity as well watching the movement isolated from that context. And so I'm just trying to get my mind around the method here. And I think that it comes down to something like wanting to separate out what's specifically dance and not part of these other art forms. But I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. So, I tried to say that when I said I speak the vocabulary of experimental psychology, but bear with me. So I know exactly of this difficulty that like dancers have, or also people from other disciplines that say you cannot fragment the phenomenon like this, like you would do with a scientific method when you do more basic research. So I'm totally with you there. As a former dancer, it also hurts me to cut out the music. But that's what the scientific method does. It wants to study phenomena, the parts that integrate it. We run the risk that then it's not the actual phenomenon anymore. And that's up to the empirical test then the next, to see if it still holds. Is it still whole if I have studied it in parts? And to come to the part where you said, you don't know if you could recognize the emotions when it's completely deprived and completely taken out of the context and so on. So we could actually do the test. So I can send you a link and you can do a rating task where we've asked the ballerina, a ballet dancer here from the Dresden-Frankfurt Dance Company, to dance, I think it was like 80 sequences of 8 counts with 5 different emotional expressions. It's just 5 seconds. You see a white silhouette on a black background. You see no face, nothing, no music. And we could see if you could still recognize the emotions. And she danced it without music. So these are empirical questions to me, and I love this interaction because these questions come up, but I also understand that it maybe is a little bit of a no-go area to fragment it like that, but that's what we're guilty of in experimental psychology.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Next, I have a question from Matthew.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Julia. Thanks for your talk. Speaking of interoceptive awareness, I can tell that before asking a question in front of such esteemed colleagues, my heart rate's up, feeling a little shaky. So bear with me as I try and put words together in a sequence that makes sense. But I'm thinking about the difference between, and this might be splitting hairs, and I don't know, but recognizing an emotion versus recognizing the way a community of practice encodes an emotion in movement. So so as I'm watching the ballet sequence, I'm not seeing an emotion, I'm seeing ballet's codes for happiness. So right? It doesn't make me feel happy. The dancer probably isn't actually happy. They're probably in pain. And I wonder, and you begin to get at this, I think, as you're talking about like people outside of Indian culture watching, potentially classical Indian forms and still recognizing, but again, you're still watching, right? We're making assumptions about how emotions are encoded through movement rather than seeing the emotion itself. So I was just wondering, I've been sitting here, my dissertation was also on cognitive perceptual expertise in dance. So I've sort of been thinking about teasing this out experimentally and what I might do. I would be interested to hear your thoughts. And the other, as long as I'm talking, I'm just going to say also, I've just been wondering about like the Cunningham Company, where in the Merce Cunningham Company, some might argue this, but really actually explicitly trained to not perform emotion, right? It is just the movement. So I'm wondering about that as like sort of a control group of really, really expert levels of bodily control and potentially interoceptive awareness, but actually a training away from emotional expression and how that work might play out in this kind of research. Thanks.
Well, I'm glad it's not just your heart rate that goes up when you have to talk in front of all these experts. So this question had a couple of parts. So if I forget something, please get back to me. So you're watching the code. Yes. So in experimental psychology, we are differentiating between emotion recognition and feeling the emotion. So it's always a huge difficulty for experimental psychologists to find the right stimuli. For example, if you want to induce happiness or anger, or, how do you do that with the actual stimuli, because if you have someone saying, doing, because they're scared, then the participant laughs, you don't have the right emotion induction kind of situation there. What we are looking at here in these kind of experiments is emotional recognition. So really it is a bit about the code. So it's a related but different field from feeling the emotion or recognizing the emotion. And Sabine hinted at it. So there are some studies that show correlations with some of these measures of emotion recognition ability and soft measures of the body, others that don't. And it's, I would say that it's very much still to be seen in the future with proper research questions and also subject numbers, what really is correlated and what is also predictive, because just that it's correlated doesn't mean that it is caused by, right? So that's the other issue that we need to see into. And then the Cunningham business. So, well, as I try to spell out with the prediction that traditions or practitioners that focus on, I can detect my emotion, but I will regulate it away, like also yoga practitioners might do. Sorry if I'm saying something wrong here, I'm not an expert. Would not predict emotional interoceptive accuracy. How do you say higher? How do you say advantages? But I don't know. It's an empirical question, and here you very nicely teased apart a type of dance that might behave where practitioners might have a different outcome measures than dancers of a different dance style. And yeah, it's super interesting, but I don't know the answer.
Wonderful. So we are just about at time. So Susanne, you are up next, but it'll have to be a quick question.
Okay, I'll try to do it quick. Thank you, Julia. So I'll go directly to the question. It concerns a variable that you set up, and then it concerns also the intervention study. Mm-hmm. So it always I'm always wondering how you actually deal with the intervention, because you have the dance, and you could, of course, describe the dance, but you also have a teacher who is sort of enacting the dance. The dance is not sort of an object you just put in the room. It's enacted by somebody who has a teaching method. So how do you deal with these variables? Because the studies I read, based in your sort of research tradition, this is often kind of not part of what is described, but there's a huge amount of variables here. So I was wondering how you deal with that. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And that's part of the operationalization, difficult word, that I preach myself, right? So I have I want to make a difference in this kind of, variable descriptions. And in our case, so because this dance style is so little studied, that's the whole story around this. So we have, for now, tons of pages of review of how this dance style has been taught and not taught, because it is not very much taught. So that saves us a little bit because it's a very little research dance style, little practice dance style. So it's a very small community. But I agree totally with you. And that's the whole point with or not the whole point, but this is a huge problem with a lot of intervention studies, that it might depend on the specific therapist that you have there. The therapist might just be really good. And that's so difficult to say in such a context. But the important thing is there to maybe understand to funders that it's not enough to have just one trainer. We need actually 3 or 4 different teachers, 3 or 4 different groups of people receiving the dance intervention to be able to say it's not an effect of the trainer. But often what fails there is money, to have so many intervention groups. I think Sabine would be very well placed to answer this question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's all give Julia a big hand. That was excellent. So now we're going to thank you so much. That was wonderful. We're going to take a little break. So we'll be back roughly at 1:15. So I recommend everyone get some water, get some coffee, stretch your legs, don't get Zoom exhausted. Again, thank you so much, Julia. And we will be back in this room. So you can either leave the room, you can stay in the room, but yes. But either way, let's take a little break and I'll reconvene in a second. Thank you so much for the excellent questions, everyone. And thank you, Julia.